My name is Noelle Carter. I'm 30 years old, and if you had asked me that morning what I was walking into, I would have said a wedding.
A celebration. A beginning.
I wouldn't have said it was the first moment I would truly understand the man I had just married. The reception was held in a ballroom that looked like something out of a magazine. Soft gold lighting, white orchids arranged like sculptures, crystal centerpieces catching every flicker of movement in the room. It was the kind of place that made everything feel elevated. Ethan had insisted his parents handle the seating chart. "They've done this before," he told me casually. "It'll be smoother." I agreed. That was my first mistake. When I walked into the ballroom after the ceremony, the room was already alive. Guests seated, glasses clinking, quiet laughter rising in waves. Everything looked perfect. At first. Then I started looking for my parents. They weren't at the front, not near the head table, not even among the second row of family seating. I scanned again, slower this time. And then I saw them. All the way in the back. Not just far, hidden. A small round table pushed against the service doors near the kitchen. Every few seconds, the doors swung open, letting out bursts of noise, clattering dishes, hurried footsteps, staff voices cutting through the music. It didn't look like part of the room. It looked like an afterthought. My dad sat upright in his suit, posture perfect like always. My mom kept adjusting the edge of the tablecloth, smoothing it over and over again, like she was trying to fix something that couldn't be fixed. I walked toward them slowly, my heels suddenly louder than everything else. "Is everything okay?" I asked. My dad smiled instantly. "Food smells amazing." That was him, always finding something good to say. But I noticed something else. 4 chairs. Just 4. My parents, my younger brother Tyler, and 1 empty seat. No extended family, no aunts, no cousins. They were scattered across the room, also in the back, but separated, isolated. It didn't feel random. It felt designed. I turned and walked back toward the entrance, toward the seating chart display. A large mirror with names written in gold script. I found mine immediately.
Head table.
Of course. Ethan's entire family filled the front section. His colleagues, people I barely knew, sat in the center. Investors, executives, people with titles that seemed to matter more than names. And my parents? Near the kitchen. I felt something tighten in my chest, but I didn't let it show. Not yet. I found Carol near the bar, laughing softly with a woman in a red dress. "Why are my parents seated by the kitchen?" I asked. She didn't hesitate, didn't lower her voice. "We didn't want them embarrassing the important guests." The woman beside her froze mid-sip. I blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" Carol smiled, polite but sharp. "They're sweet, Noelle, but tonight is curated. We have investors here." For a second, I thought she might laugh, say she was joking. She didn't. I looked across the room. Ethan was watching. He had heard enough. I walked straight to him. "Your mom just said she didn't want my parents embarrassing your guests." He exhaled, barely reacting. "Noelle, just let it go. It's seating." Just seating. I repeated those words in my head. Just seating. Like it didn't represent anything. Like it didn't say exactly where they thought my family belonged. I thought about my dad working 16-hour days at the auto shop. My mom studying English late at night so she could help me with homework. The way they insisted on contributing to this wedding, even when I told them they didn't have to. And this was where they were placed. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. Instead, I looked around the room, at the important guests, at the people who were supposed to matter more. And then I made a decision. I turned and walked straight toward the DJ booth. The DJ, Marcus, looked confused when I reached for the microphone. "Can you lower the music for a second?" I asked. He hesitated, then nodded. The music faded. Conversations softened, one table at a time, like ripples across water. I could feel eyes turning toward me. I smiled. "Thank you all for being here tonight," I said, my voice steady. "It means a lot to Ethan and me to celebrate with such an incredible group of people. Family, friends, business partners, investors." I let that last word hang just a second longer. Then I stepped away from the booth and started walking. Not toward the head table, not toward the center, toward the back. I could hear chairs shifting as people turned to follow me with their eyes. I stopped beside the kitchen doors, beside my parents. My mom looked up, confused. I smiled at her. "I want everyone to meet the two most important people in this room," I said. "My parents, Daniel and Rosa Carter." Polite applause began. I didn't stop. My dad worked 16-hour days so I could go to college without debt. My mom taught herself English by watching late-night news so she could help me with homework. The room grew quieter. They taught me something I think matters more than anything else tonight. I looked around slowly. That respect isn't something you earn with money. It's something you give. The applause grew stronger, warmer,
Real.
I reached for two empty chairs from a nearby table and pulled them closer. But I think they deserve a better view. I turned toward a center table, Ethan's coworkers. "Would you mind switching tables with my parents?" There was a pause. "Just a moment." Then one of them, a man named Brent, stood up immediately. "Of course," he said. His wife followed without hesitation. Within seconds, the entire table began moving. No complaints. No resistance. Just quiet understanding. My parents tried to protest, but I gently stopped them. "It's already done," I whispered. Servers rushed in, adjusting plates, glasses, settings. And just like that, my parents were no longer hidden. They were in the center of the room, exactly where they should have been all along. I returned to the head table slowly. Ethan leaned toward me, his voice tight. "You didn't have to make it a spectacle." I met his eyes. "I didn't," I said softly. "But someone did." Across from us, Carol's smile didn't reach her eyes. Dinner resumed. But something had changed. I saw it in the way people started approaching my parents. Shaking hands, laughing, listening. Not embarrassed. Not uncomfortable. Interested.
Respectful.
For a moment, I thought that was the end of it. That maybe things would settle. That maybe the message had been clear enough. I was wrong. Because later that night, when the speeches began, Carol decided she wasn't finished. And what she said next would push everything past a point I couldn't undo. I should have known Carol wouldn't let it go. Women like Carol didn't scream when they wanted to hurt you. They smiled. They adjusted their pearls. They waited until the room was watching. The best man spoke first. His speech was harmless. College stories, bad jokes, the kind of warm embarrassment people expect at weddings. Then my maid of honor stood up and talked about the night I met Ethan. How nervous I had been. How I kept saying he seemed too polished for me. Everyone laughed. Even I smiled. For a few minutes, the room felt normal again. Then Carol stood up. She hadn't been called. She hadn't been introduced. She simply walked to the DJ booth, and took the microphone from Marcus like she owned the room. Maybe, in her mind, she did. She began beautifully. Of course she did. She spoke about Ethan's ambition, his discipline, his future. She described him as the kind of man who had been raised to lead. Ethan sat beside me, smiling stiffly, as if every word had been rehearsed inside him years before. Then Carol's gaze shifted.
Toward me.
Toward my parents. And her voice changed just enough for me to feel it before I understood it. Tonight is not only about love, she said. It is about legacy, about families joining together, about reputation, influence, and the standards we carry forward. The room quieted. Not completely, but enough. I felt Ethan tense beside me. Carol continued. When someone marries into a family, they also step into its name, its expectations, its public standing. A few people nodded politely. Others looked down at their plates. Then she gave a light laugh. Of course, adjustment can be educational. There were scattered chuckles. Thin ones. Uncomfortable ones. She looked directly at my parents' table. We all come from different backgrounds, some of us from generations of leadership, and some from more humble beginnings. My mother stopped smiling. My father folded his hands on the table, and I waited. I waited for Ethan to stand.
To interrupt.
To say, Mom, that's enough. He didn't. He stared at his water glass, like it contained the answer to who he was. Carol ended by saying she trusted Ethan to make decisions that would elevate the family.
Elevate.
That word landed like a door closing. The applause afterward was polite, but weak. I turned to Ethan. Are you going to say anything? He didn't look at me. You're reading too much into it. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because something inside me was starting to understand. I looked around the room. The state senator looked uncomfortable. Brent, the coworker who had switched tables earlier, was staring straight at Carol. Several guests weren't clapping at all. Then something happened Carol hadn't planned. A man stood from one of the front tables. Richard Hale. I knew his name because Ethan's father had mentioned him at least 10 times during the wedding planning. Richard owned a regional manufacturing company and was tied to a major investment deal Ethan's family desperately wanted. He didn't take the microphone. He didn't need to. His voice carried clearly across the ballroom. I actually prefer humble beginnings, he said. They tend to produce people who understand value. The room went completely still. Carol's smile froze. Richard turned toward my father. Sir, I heard you restore classic cars. My dad nodded once, cautious. Richard smiled. I have a 1967 Mustang that needs serious work. Maybe we should talk. My father's expression softened. I'd be happy to take a look. And just like that, the room shifted again. Not loudly, not dramatically, but unmistakably. People who had spent the evening orbiting Ethan's parents began drifting toward the center tables, toward my parents, toward the people Carol had tried to hide. My dad talked about engines and paintwork with Richard like he had known him for years. My mom told one of the executives how she worked her way from cashier to store manager, and the woman listened like she was hearing the most impressive resume in the room. They weren't embarrassing anyone. They were captivating people. And that seemed to bother Carol more than anything else. For the rest of the night, she barely spoke to me. Ethan barely touched my hand. Photos were taken. Cake was cut. Music played. From the outside, it might have still looked like a wedding. But inside me, something had already started pulling away. When we finally got back to the hotel suite, I thought maybe Ethan would apologize. Maybe he would say he had frozen. Maybe he would admit his mother had gone too far. Instead, he closed the door behind us and said, "You embarrassed my mother." I turned slowly. She embarrassed herself. You should have stayed out of it. My parents were put beside a kitchen door, Ethan. It was one table. It was a message. He rubbed his forehead. You made it public. She made it cruel. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and there was no confusion in his eyes. Only frustration. Like I was the problem he had to manage. I asked him one question. If this is how your family treats mine on our wedding day, what happens next year? What happens when we have children? He didn't answer. That silence told me more than any speech could have. Finally, he said, "We'll talk after the honeymoon." But there was one problem. There wasn't going to be a honeymoon. Because while Ethan and I were standing in that hotel suite, arguing about whether dignity was worth discomfort, something was already happening downstairs. Something neither of us knew about yet. And by morning, Ethan's family would learn that image is only powerful until the wrong person sees what's underneath. I didn't sleep that night. Ethan eventually stopped arguing, changed into a t-shirt, and lay down like the day had been normal. Like nothing had cracked open between us. He scrolled through his phone for a while, the glow of the screen lighting up his face in the dark. Then he turned over and closed his eyes. I stayed by the window. The city stretched out below me, glass and light and quiet movement. It looked peaceful from above, stable, untouchable. I used to think that's what stability was. Something solid, something permanent. But that night, I started to understand it was something else entirely. Around midnight, Ethan's phone began to buzz. Once. Twice. 3 times. He ignored it at first, pulling the pillow over his ear like it was an inconvenience. Then it rang again. And again. Finally, with a frustrated sigh, he grabbed it. "It's my dad," he muttered. He answered. I couldn't hear the other side, only Ethan's voice. "What do you mean he left early?" Pause. "No, that doesn't make sense." Longer pause. "You wouldn't pull funding over a speech?" That made me turn. Ethan sat up slowly. His posture changed. "You're serious?" Silence. Then he ended the call. For a moment, he just stared straight ahead. "What happened?" I asked quietly. He ran a hand through his hair, still processing. "Richard Hale left the reception early," he said. Before he left, he told my dad he's reconsidering the partnership. I didn't say anything. Ethan kept going, faster now, like saying it out loud might make it less real. Apparently, after my mom's speech, he pulled my dad aside and asked if he agreed with what she said. He laughed once, but there was no humor in it. My dad tried to brush it off, said it was just a joke, a misunderstanding. I already knew where this was going. Ethan swallowed. Richard asked him, "If this is how your family talks about people, how do you talk about your employees?" The room felt colder. By the time we got upstairs, Ethan continued, Richard had already emailed his legal team to pause the investment deal. Pause. "It's not small, Noelle." I nodded once. I figured. Without that deal, I knew what it meant. Cash flow problems, expansion delays, pressure from the board. Maybe worse. Ethan looked at me. "This is because you made a scene." I almost didn't respond. But something in me refused to let that settle into truth. "How?" I asked calmly. "I didn't insult anyone. I didn't attack anyone. I moved my parents to a better table. You embarrassed my family in front of investors." Your mother insulted mine in front of them first." He didn't answer. And that silence again. It was starting to feel familiar. The next morning, everything moved faster. I went downstairs early to meet my parents for breakfast. My mom smiled when she saw me, but it didn't reach her eyes. My dad stood up, like he always did when I walked in. Quiet, steady, grounded. We sat down. Ordered coffee. Pretended for a moment that it was just another morning. Then I noticed my mom glancing at her phone. "Is everything okay?" I asked. She hesitated, then turned the screen toward me. A video. Not long. Not the whole speech. Just the part. Carol's voice, clear as ever. Some of us from generations of leadership, some from more humble beginnings. The caption read, "This was said at my friend's wedding last night." My stomach tightened. "How many people have seen this?" I asked. My dad answered quietly, "More than enough." By 9 o'clock, the video had been shared hundreds of times. By 10, someone had tagged Ethan's father's company. By noon, a local business blog had picked it up. Comments were flooding in. Not kind ones. Former employees were speaking up. Stories about favoritism, about how clients were treated differently depending on their background, about meetings where certain names got more respect than others. It wasn't just about a speech anymore. It was about a pattern. Ethan came into the restaurant just before noon. He looked pale, like he hadn't slept either. "My dad's in crisis mode," he said without sitting down. "Investors are calling, the board wants a statement." I watched him carefully. There was stress in his voice.
Urgency.
But not once did he say his mother had been wrong. My phone rang. "Carol." I stepped outside to take it. She didn't say hello. "Did you encourage someone to record me?" "No." A pause. Then, sharper. "This is your fault." I looked out at the street, people passing by like nothing was happening. "You chose the words," I said. She hung up. Just like that. No apology. No reflection. Just blame. That afternoon, Ethan's father released a public statement. Carefully worded. The comments were taken out of context. They did not reflect the company's values. They respected all backgrounds. It didn't work. By evening, 2 smaller partners had already announced they were stepping back from negotiations. And then Ethan said something I hadn't expected. "I need you to make a statement." I turned to him slowly. "What kind of statement?" "Just clarify things," he said. "Say my mom didn't mean it the way it sounded, that it was misunderstood." I stared at him. "Misunderstood?" He exhaled. "If this calms down, people will move on." "What exactly would I be clarifying?" I asked, because it sounded exactly like what she meant. His jaw tightened. "You're letting pride destroy my family's business." There it was again. Family. But the way he said it didn't include me. I realized something then. We weren't arguing about a wedding anymore. We weren't even arguing about his mother. We were arguing about values, about truth, about what you protect when everything is on the line. "I'm not lying for her," I said quietly. "You're choosing them over me." I shook my head. "I'm choosing respect." That afternoon, I drove to my parents' house. The same house I grew up in. The same table where my mom used to help me with homework, sounding out words she had learned just hours before. She had already arranged the leftover wedding flowers I sent home. Carefully. Like it was just another Sunday. My dad asked if I was okay. And for the first time that day, I told the truth. I told them everything. The calls, the investors, the video, Ethan asking me to defend Carol. My mom listened quietly. Then she said something that made my chest ache. Maybe we should have just stayed at the back table. Something inside me broke. I reached across the table and took her hand. "No," I said firmly. "You should have been at the front." My phone buzzed. A message from Brent. "Can I come by? There's something you should know." An hour later, he was sitting in my parents' living room. He looked different outside the ballroom. Less formal. More certain. "I'm the one who posted the video," he said. My mom blinked. My dad leaned back slightly. "I didn't do it for drama," he continued. "I've seen things at the company for years. Promotions passed over, comments in meetings, clients treated differently based on last names." He looked at me. When Carol gave that speech, it confirmed everything. I felt a chill run through me. "But that's not the only reason I came," he added. "There's more." He paused. Richard Hale didn't just pause the investment. My dad leaned forward slightly. He requested an internal audit of the company as a condition for reconsidering. Silence filled the room. And he asked me to provide documentation. That was the moment I understood. This wasn't just fallout. This was exposure. What happened at the wedding didn't create something new. It revealed something that had always been there. Brent looked at me again. "What you did, moving your parents, it gave people the courage to speak." I sat there, trying to process it. I hadn't planned any of this. I hadn't wanted any of this. I just didn't want my parents sitting by the kitchen. That night, I went back to the hotel. Ethan was on the phone when I walked in, pacing. He ended the call when he saw me. I didn't sit down. "I'm not making a statement defending your mother," I said. He nodded slowly. "And if you make one of your own," he said, "there's no going back." "I know." He studied my face. "Are you really willing to risk our marriage over this?" I met his eyes. "It was already at risk the moment you shrugged." He didn't try to stop me when I opened my laptop. And what I wrote that night changed everything. I didn't write anything dramatic. No accusations. No names. No anger. Just 3 paragraphs. 3 simple, careful paragraphs. I wrote that at my wedding, my parents had been intentionally seated away from the main floor. I wrote that a speech had been given about reputation and humble beginnings, and I wrote that I believed respect was not conditional on income, education, or connections. Then I added one final line. "I will never apologize for defending my family." I read it once, closed my eyes, and hit post. I didn't wait to see what would happen. I closed the laptop and sat there in the quiet of the hotel room, listening to the faint hum of the city outside. Ethan didn't say anything. He just watched me, like he was trying to decide if I had just made the biggest mistake of my life or his. By morning, the answer was everywhere. My phone was vibrating non-stop when I woke up. Messages, notifications, mentions. People had already connected the dots. My post was being shared alongside the video of Carol's speech. Strangers were piecing together the story without me having to explain it. Former employees were adding their own experiences in the comments, stories about being overlooked, dismissed, quietly pushed aside. A supplier posted about negotiations where they felt looked down on. Another mentioned how certain clients were treated differently based on their last names. It was no longer just a wedding story. It was a pattern being exposed in real time. Then something neither Ethan nor I expected happened. Richard Hale released a statement. Short.
Direct.
He said his company would not move forward with any partnership that did not reflect the values of equal respect and opportunity. He referenced recent public remarks as the reason for reevaluating the deal. Within 48 hours, 2 more investors withdrew. Ethan's father's board announced an independent investigation into leadership conduct. Carol's name started disappearing from charity boards she had once proudly displayed on every introduction. The world they had built, carefully, strategically, obsessively, began to fracture. Not slowly, not quietly, but all at once. Ethan barely spoke to me during those 2 days. He stayed on calls constantly, pacing the room, speaking in low, urgent tones. Every now and then I would hear fragments: damage control, containment, legal review. Not once did I hear the word apology. On the 3rd day, he finally turned to me. "You could have handled this quietly." I looked up from where I was sitting. "How?" "By not making it public, by talking to me, to my family." I held his gaze. "And then what?" He hesitated. "Then we fix it." I shook my head slowly. "By pretending it didn't happen?" "That's not what I said." "No," I replied softly, "but that's what you meant." He ran his hand through his hair, frustration building again. "I just wanted peace." I stood then. "So did I." He looked at me, confused. "Peace built on silence isn't peace, Ethan." The room went quiet. For the first time since the wedding, neither of us tried to fill the silence. That was when I knew. Not because of what he said, but because of what he couldn't. That afternoon, I packed my suitcase. Not dramatically, not angrily, just deliberately. Ethan watched from across the room. "Are you leaving for a few days?" he asked. I paused, folding one last piece of clothing. "I don't know," I said honestly. And that was the truth. I didn't know where I was going next, but I knew exactly what I couldn't stay in. Because the seating chart had never really been about chairs. It was about placement, about hierarchy, about where people believed you belonged. And what hurt the most wasn't what Carol said. It was that Ethan heard it and chose comfort over correction. My parents never asked for revenge. They never asked for justice. They would have forgiven everything if I had asked them to. That's who they are. The next day, I went back to their house. My mom had already made tea. My dad was sitting at the table, his phone in his hand. He looked up when I walked in. "I got an email," he said. He turned the screen toward me. Subject line: Mustang Restoration. From Richard Hale. He wanted to bring the car by next week. I looked at my dad. He smiled. Small, proud, quiet. "Sometimes," he said, "the back table has the best view." I laughed softly, even though my chest felt tight. Because he wasn't wrong. Ethan's family lost their biggest deal. Carol lost the image she had spent years protecting. The company faced an investigation that would take months to untangle. And me? I lost a marriage. But not the way people think. I didn't lose it in one moment. I didn't lose it when I posted those words. I lost it the second he shrugged. Because that was the moment I realized something I couldn't unsee. It only worked when I stayed quiet. I didn't destroy their world. I didn't orchestrate any of it. I didn't plan for investors to walk away or for videos to go viral. All I did was move a table, and everything that collapsed after that was already built on the wrong foundation.